Hey everybody, what's up? We're back with another episode of At the Elephants. I'm your host, Rob Morris, and we have a wonderful episode today. I am so excited for this. It's the second one this week. If you're keeping track, we're doing 2 episodes a week now because I recorded way too fucking many of these ahead of time, and now they're burning a hole in my editing schedule, and I gotta get them out. So today, our second episode of the week, following Mr. Matthew Van Gessel on Monday, today we have Mr. Wiley, Basho, Gorn. Wiley is one of my best friends. I'm going to be upfront about that. I talk to a lot of my good buddies on this show. I also talk to strangers who I've never met. But every now and then, one of my very dear, best, and oldest friends is on the show. And that's what you're going to get to listen to today. We're going to get into Wiley's background and where he's from, so I won't waste a lot of time talking about that. But he is the class of 2013 in drama, in directing, the exact same year and major as myself. Our class was Wiley Gorn, myself, Stephen Kopp, and Daniel Kelly. All 3 of them will be on this season. I've already recorded their episodes. They are in the edit right now, and they are on their way to you later this fall. With Stephen and Daniel, great episodes coming out very soon. But today we have Mr. Wiley Gorn. Not only was Wiley my classmate, not only is he one of my best friends, we were roommates in college for a number of years together. We did the drugs together. We made the art together. We made music together. We were in a My Chemical Romance cover band. We, went to his place in upstate New York over spring break freshman year and did mushrooms together and lost our fucking minds. And even more recently, and maybe most significantly, Wiley officiated my wedding in Colorado. He stood before my family and my wife's family, now our family, and joined us together in holy matrimony. It was a very special experience for me. For those of you who know Dave Thomas Brown, he also officiated his wedding, which was my idea. I want to be clear about, like 10 years ago, I was always going to have him officiate my wedding since we were in college. Dave stole that from me and did it first. I have since forgiven him for that. Dave was also in my wedding. But Wiley is a unique spirit. Anyone who knows him knows that, truthfully, all the people I think who went to School of the Arts and everybody really is definitely unique and special unto themselves. But Wiley brings a very specific energy anywhere he goes. And you're gonna pick up on that in this interview, I hope. I keep calling them interviews. I got to stop doing that. It's just a conversation. But this conversation with Wiley really brought me back, even though I just saw him a few months ago for the wedding. It brought me back to the enthusiasm that I have to talk to someone like him, because not only is he intelligent and provocative and talented and all of these great things, he has an openness to him. He has a sweetness and an amount of heart to his character that I so admire. It is why I had him officiate the wedding. It is why I'm so glad to call him my friend. And so I really hope you enjoy this conversation. As I mentioned earlier in the intro, we are doing 2 episodes a week. That is going to continue probably through the rest of the year, because I am booking and recording this show faster and at a greater volume than I ever have before. Thrilled about it, excited to do it. I'm doing sometimes 2-3 interviews a week. They are piling up on my hard drive faster than I can get them to you. So I'm working really hard to push it all out. And let's see, any other updates? Of course, if you're watching this on one particular platform, I just want to make it clear where all you can find this. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or any of the podcast apps, I think we're on 3 or 4 of them. The full video version of this interview, which I did bother to record, the Zoom video. If you want to watch us talk, which I've heard from some people, it's a hit or miss thing. Some people, even if it's a video, they really just prefer to listen to it. The reason I'm publishing the video on YouTube, on the At the Elephants channel on YouTube, is because I prefer to watch a podcast, even if it's just 2 people talking. Joe Rogan or your mom's house or whatever podcasts I might be listening to, even if there's no visual element, they're not doing anything really physical necessarily, or they're not showing clips or doing anything that you need to see, I still like to watch. I just like watching people's expressions, and I like seeing the connection between people. So if you want to watch this video, this podcast episode, it is available on YouTube. If you're already watching me right now on YouTube, thank you. I appreciate it. Share this with somebody. And I will leave that as my last note. I don't care about likes and subscribe and all that shit. It doesn't matter to me. Watch it if you want or if you don't. But if you do like the show and you're still in contact with other people who went to School of the Arts, share a reel. Go on Instagram, share a reel. Go underneath all of the apps and platforms, have a little share button, grab the link, send it to somebody you think might appreciate it. If you know someone who loves Wiley as much as I do, good luck with that. But as much as you do, send it to them. Let them know. We're going to get into some of my favorite things about Wiley. I could talk to him for fucking the rest of my life, but we talk about some of my favorite things about him. We talk about the story of his growing up in upstate New York in the Hudson River Valley. We talk about his parents' careers, which are fascinating to me. I mean, my family is full of mechanics and roughnecks and cattle ranchers. So for me, meeting someone like Wiley and getting to know his parents in the time that I did, and his mom's doing calligraphy and his dad's playing Indian flute and all these crazy things that I couldn't even imagine when I was a kid. Getting to know him and his family has been a blessing, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about his experience in the live action role playing summer camps that he did, the Wayfinder experience. And of course, we're going to get into what he's been up to since school. To no one's surprise, if you knew Wiley at school at all, he very much has stayed in contact with the Shakespeare. Wiley has a tremendous memory. His ability to recall Shakespeare especially astounds me to this day. And I got a pretty good memory. I'm pretty good with quotes, pretty good with, you remember the thing in the movie with that, in the scene where I'm great at that. Wiley puts me to shame. He is so incredibly talented when it comes to his recall of these things. We're going to get into that. So enjoy this interview, conversation, whatever the fuck, with Wiley Gorn.
Yeah. Wow. Look at this.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay. We're almost done with the show's almost open. And I have been here since like June 20th. So it's been a while, and I am fucking ready to leave.
Yeah. Where are you right now?
So, I'm in Ashland. Oregon. Working at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And it's been great. It's been an incredible process, but it's been a really long process because I think in responding to the We See You White American Theater letter that went out to all the regional theaters in 2020, they've really taken time to restructure how they build plays. And it's meant that like the process is just stretched out. Like we were working just 5 days a week, a few 8-hour days, but mostly it's just 4-hour days. So instead of like a month to build and then like a week of tech, we had 2 months to build this show. And we were in tech for almost like 3 weeks, and we had 5 previews. It's just,
so
it's been
can you
good.
tell me about this letter? I have no idea what this is.
Oh yeah. Okay. So, I'd say this all started in the midst of 2020, like height pandemic. It was right after the George Floyd murder.
Okay.
A bunch of activists came together in a bunch of different fields, but specifically in theater. And we're like, hey, this isn't working for us. Like when we come back from this, we won't stand for the way we've been treated.
Which is?
Artists in theater can only it's really difficult to make a living. And usually artists have to choose between having a family or any sort of career. And it's geared towards people who have the privilege to, they don't have to worry about work, so they can have a family and then go do this stuff.
Some of us just quit and go do television.
Yeah. Hey, listen, theater could learn a thing or two from television, especially thinking about streaming stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to see live captured stuff. And it's like, man, when have we been like recording live staged things with an actual audience? Like, have we done that ever? It's like, yeah, that's all TV and sitcom. So
yeah, exactly. And that's something that I think is, and we can definitely kind of crack this open a little bit more later, but I certainly, every time I talk to somebody who has remained working in theater after going to theater school, as opposed to moving on to something else, my thought always goes to like, so how do you do that? Like, how do you like you're either from money or you found some magical gig that keeps you alive. And that's a very special thing. It's a very, very special thing to find. Yeah,
it's fucking weird and strange. And I love the team. I love the artists. I think a lot of this, it's like the theater's version of Build Back Better. Like, okay, we're going to make these changes. We're going to make sure that there is ED&I, equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant involved in every single process. Because once you start to like, the immediate choice for so many companies is like, okay, we just put, people of color, the global majority, just put them on stage. It's their stories. We elevate their stories. But then you go a layer deeper and you're like, okay, well, who are the playwrights? Who are the directors? Who are the designers that are designing for these bodies? Okay, well, we get more and more diverse. It's like, no, well, who's actually the people? Who's in casting? Who's building the teams? Who's picking the plays? Who's structuring all of it? And like, the deeper you go, it's the whole American theater is built on this system that totally, it totally benefits elements of white supremacy. That and it's like, it's not enough.
Is there a difference though between, and I don't want to start this off by getting myself canceled, but is there a difference between white supremacy being supported and white majority being supported? Because that's two different things, is it not? Is there not like in a lot of these places, especially in regional theaters, the voices of color are so important and the stories of the communities of color are crucial, but also still they might be in cities where the population is like 80% white.
Mm-hmm,
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, when you then see a majority of white people making things, is that just a result of the people who are there?
I don't think, man,
let's us two white people sort this out.
We're going to figure this out right now. If you're listening, like, this is going to be solved. And I'm going to give us a time minute. We have,
because I want to talk about other stuff. So let's solve this in 60 seconds.
I think it really does have to do with who are the people in power. And okay, I also think it's a little bit about breaking down what we mean by white supremacy, because I think the term white supremacy is tied to the most like despicable and horrifying elements.
Sure, you go KKK racism. Right away.
Exactly. And that's not what's going on.
Torches.
It's noticing that in so many of these institutions, it's built to keep like the very few at the top making all the decisions and like reaping a lot of the benefits. And by and large, especially in regional theater, those are all white folks. So that doesn't feel to me as like a white majority, because you can fill your stages with people of colors and you can do all this stuff. But again, who's collecting that paycheck?
Daddy Warbucks is still Daddy Warbucks.
It's still funding it. So, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we need generous people, generous, wealthy people to give their money to support this stuff. That has been like one of the main ways that artists make work. So that's not a bad thing.
Until theater figures out advertising.
They really a little bit behind on that. It's tough because theater, it's so easy for it to be fucking bad. Like, it's so easy for a show just to not hit. And maybe that has nothing to do with the show. That's just like what's going on with me when I walk into a show. And I don't, you're on the hook in theater in a way that you aren't in movies. And as a result, it's really easy to get bored in theater. It's easy for your mind to wander. And that's just like a sad truth. So I don't know that there's any solving that other than just we all got to be better.
Well, it depends on the theater, right? And that's the thing that's so diverse about it is there are so many. When you're dealing in film and television, you're almost exclusively talking about new works, right? Yes. You're doing things that haven't been done before. And in fact, when they're like, we should remake this old movie, people are like, why? Like, there's a huge outcry. And yet you go to the theater and you're like, half the time, all we do is remake the old shit over and over and over and over again.
All the time.
but we, obviously as like theater majors, as people who have spent so much of our life dedicated to making that kind of stuff, we see the value. There's a reason we still do Shakespeare. There's a reason that we still, duplicate these performances with new casts, new ideas, new themes. There is something to be gained in that.
Oh yeah.
And I think that that's something that gets lost in between the two. I find it fascinating that it is something that it's like that bridge just doesn't want to be built in between the idea of how do we get the money? Let's be honest. How do we get the money of the commercial industry into an art form that is far less concerned with commercial ability? Like we're not worried about whether or not everyone is going to love this show. Sometimes we're just making the show for those few people who do connect with it, that do get something out of it. Whereas you can't put something on TV if Pepsi's not going to like it, because if they don't like it, then they're not going to help you make it. And then you can't do it. And that's just how it goes. And theater does have that freedom to say, hey, listen, we were never going to make any fucking money off this thing anyway, so in a broad spectrum. So let's just do King John.
Yeah, let's do King John
and see what we get out of that, which obviously we're going to get something out of doing something that is so rarely done. But, it's interesting. It's like, how does that bridge get made?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one way is, how can you find more ways to give people access or give people a reason to seek access to your, to what you're offering? I do think
fucking Hamilton on Disney Plus, man.
Yeah. Well, and I think that in general, the English are way ahead of us in terms of their ability to like capture like really high quality theater, dance, opera, symphonies, whatever, on screen, on film. And I think that has to do with the unions, because I know there was a big fight going on between equity and SAG, right? Like throughout the pandemic of, you can't go on screen. Equity actors, how you can't film them. That goes against everything that like theater is about. You've got to be live in the moment. And it sucks that like these two unions that are considered sister unions, that there was so much, they fucking hate each other. There was so much contention, and it meant that a bunch of people just couldn't work. And it also meant that like, it made it more difficult for theaters to take chances on, what if what if that's the way it goes? Because I feel that equity is just terrified that they're going to be consumed by SAG.
Is my attitude. Like,
it's all fucking one. It's all one.
The socialist in me is like, don't we all win when we all work together?
Yeah.
And if anyone's going to lean into that, it's going to be the theater dorks. You love your socialism. That's the way it goes.
Listen, by committing ourselves to theater, we are committing to a life spent exclusively doing group projects. Right. And group projects can really suck sometimes.
Even your one man show or one woman show, one person shows, there's a staff of 40 people working to make them happen.
Yeah.
Well, let's back up, dude, because I love this conversation and we can come back to it. But this is the first time you've ever done At the Elephants ever. I've never had you on it before.
The first time that I've. Yeah. And I remember when you first started making this podcast. I remember because Daniel Lemone's album Punk Philosophy had just come out.
That's
and
right.
I listened to that fucking album all the time. And you use it as your
It
little
is still
intro.
the theme song. Yes.
Yeah,
on the Prisoners of the Inquisition.
Oh, incredible song. His voice, man. I love his voice so much.
Well, I want to tell everybody why it's crazy that you haven't been on this show. We're bringing this show back. It's now, it's gone off and on so many times. I've stopped counting seasons and just kind of think of it as years. And I started in 2014, right after we graduated. You and I both graduated from directing in drama in 2013.
Yes.
2 of 4 people, both of the other fellas that graduated have already done this show. And yet you were my roommate for the longest time. And we were really, I love Stephen and Kopp and Daniel Kelly so much, but you and I were always far closer, I feel, for so long, if not just literally living in the same house through the program. Yeah. But it's fascinating. I mean, you officiated my wedding. We're pretty good friends.
I did that.
And yet, for one reason or another, a lot of it just because we weren't always in the same place. I didn't do these remotely for a long time. It's part of why I didn't bring the show back for so long, because I was like, this is an in-person show. It feels weird to do it remotely. And then during the pandemic, I was like, maybe I should just start doing it remotely, bite the bullet and say, look, that's how this show is going to get done sometimes, especially since so many of the guests I would want to speak with are in New York, a city that I visit so rarely. But it's interesting that you haven't been on in all this time. And so what I want to do is I want to do what I would normally do with the other guests who have done the show, and not immediately, well, we've already 30 minutes in, but not immediately go into what's going on now. I want to talk about you. I take it for granted that I know you so well. I know your story because, we shared so much of it. And then while sharing the parts we did, we shared the parts that came before. And I feel like when I talk about my friends to new people, and for example, my lovely wife, when I was telling her like who, I bring up Wiley, she's like, who is Wiley? When I talk about other people, a lot of times it has to do with, very quickly, it has to do with our schooling or where we met or whatever the circumstances of that is. But with you, and this is true with anybody I ever talk to about you, I got to talk about your family. I got to talk about the way you grew up, where you grew up. Like, I don't say that to because some people I'm like, I don't know, he's from Houston or something. Daniel Kelly, whatever. I think his dad does landscape architect. I don't know, whatever. And then I go into talking about school. But with you, I am so endlessly, and even to this day, fascinated by your parents, by your sister and your place that you grew up. It's amazing to me. So I'm going to talk to you for a second like I don't know all these things so that I can help everybody know the story. And where'd you grow up, Wiley?
I grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York State, just about 2 hours north of New York. I think actually, now that I'm saying this, I think I had a dream last night, because I would always say like, I grew up in upstate New York. But if you look at it on the map, it's not upstate. And in my dream, I was looking at a map of New York and I realized, oh my God, I'm like just right there. There's so much more state. Well, it's a huge state.
And a testament to how elitist New York City is, that anything north of the southernmost point of the entire triangular state is upstate.
It's just upstate. You go up there.
There's us, and then there's the fucking rest of it.
Yes. So Hudson Valley, to be specific, in a little cluster of towns. It's been great. Jumping ahead. It was a beautiful place to grow up. I'm so thankful for what I had from my childhood. I was born in Brooklyn to my parents, Steve and Barbara. Steve is a musician, and he's playing the gigs in a city, and they quickly realized that they needed a little more space, so they bought a little farmhouse in a cornfield. I'm wearing a Corn shirt. I'm wearing a shirt.
Listening. It
I'm
says
wearing a
corn.
shirt that says "Enjoy Corn," and I do, just like the little boy on the TikTok. So they moved upstate to the Hudson Valley when I was about 2, and that's where I grew up. My dad was constantly commuting back and forth into the city to play shows. We kept an apartment there for a while, which we split with a friend, but then we got priced out of it. Yeah, my childhood, to describe it, it was pretty magical. I got involved at a very young age in a live action role play summer camp called the Wayfinder Experience. You can still check them out. They still run camps in
That's awesome.
the Hudson Valley and like the New York area. They're wonderful. And that was I had always really loved.
For those listening, live action role playing. Let's be fair. The best mainstream thing we can bring up is role models. We're talking about a bunch of folks meeting up with characters. They're doing quests. They have fake weapons
quests,
and
you've got swords.
Yeah.
There's a magic system. I always think that's how I describe it. And it sounds really nerdy, and it was, but also it was super fucking cool.
Of course.
Because I think that this camp, especially what Wayfinder did, they were so story focused. Right. So it wasn't this thing like, oh, we're playing one game that will play out, and every time I come back, I'm my same character. No. Every week there was a new game. There was a new world. There were new conflicts. There were new monsters. There were new stories that you had to embark on. And so you created a new character. Or sometimes if the game writer was like particularly dedicated, maybe they wrote a character sheet for you that sets up different relationships or wants. You create this character, and then you get let loose into this world. There was all. So
you're doing immersive, like improv theater, basically. From what age did you start doing that?
I started when I was 11 years old, the summer of 2002.
And were you doing any other 12 theatrical things at this point, or was this your first kind of performance-ish thing that you got into?
I was always doing the theater stuff. I have an incredible memory, and I can say that because it's true and it's not always fun. But I memorized scenes from like Monty Python,
Faulty Towers,
Holy Grail, Faulty Towers. I would perform them at dinner parties. And I remember doing that from the age of like 7 onward. That stuff would just stick in my head and I would perform it. And I loved doing all the school plays. I went to a Waldorf school, which is
means?
The Waldorf school system was developed by a man named Rudolf Steiner in Germany. And it's an alternate form of education that puts a lot of focus on language arts, on a lot of like the visual arts being a really important element of education. So over the course of a year, as we learn stuff, we would write essays and we would create pictures and diagrams of what we were learning, and we'd put it all together in our main lesson books. So at the end of a year, you had created the textbooks that you were learning from, which like it's actually kind of brilliant. And it also like, it condenses all that random shit that your kid would bring home. It's like, no, we've got it in your main lesson book, and now we've got a book.
Well, and it also expands your overall arts education across everything that you're doing. So you're kind 100%. Of in an art school, even when you're learning math and science and these different things, which I can't stress this enough. I think one of the things that absolutely enamored me about you and about your story and where you were from is you would speak so plainly and casually about how you grew up, and yet every element of it that seemed to come up was like, wait, what the fuck are you talking about? Like I want to expand this even further. Like, so we just talked about your schooling, and you're spending your summers doing this like live D&D style camp with all these older kids who are helping you guys learn how to pretend even better than kids already know how to do. And all of this is embraced by the fact that your parents are professional artists and in not even the conventional way that you might think of, like, oh, were they painters and dad's a musician? Was he play like the guitar or the bass or something? Maybe, but let's start one at a time here. Well, maybe we'll start with dad, because I feel like it's easier to wrap your brain around than mom.
Yeah, sure.
Steve Gorn, one of my favorite people I've met to date. Steve
Mine too.
does what? What kind of music is he playing?
Well, Steve began as a jazz musician in the 60s, but in college, he fell in love with classical Indian music because it shares a similar structure to jazz in terms of like, a song might be in a certain key or there's a melody that then is improvised and sort of expounded around in the playing of the piece. So in 1968 or 69, he moved to India and he started studying the bamboo flute. So Steve Gorn plays the bamboo flute and the clarinet and the alto sax. And now he's at a stage in his career where he starts melding the worlds of the various instruments. So he'll play Indian ragas on the clarinet or, Thelonious Monk jazz on the flute.
I was just thinking about Thelonious Monk this morning. I love that you bring him up.
How do we dress tonight as sharp as possible?
If those who are not familiar with Thelonious Monk, this is the same era. John Coltrane, it's kind of a little after, but go listen to it. If you're a fan, I always compare it to the guy who sings for Cake. Because he's like, I don't care about being on time exactly. We'll figure it out. No. There's a willingness to kind of be like, if the note comes a little bit before or after the beat, it's going to be fine. And that's part of it.
That's like in the pocket.
Yeah, exactly. He's out of pocket 100%. So your dad was not a struggling musician in your lifetime, as many fathers who do that are.
No, and as I grow up and I encounter him more as a person and less as he'll always be my dad, but now he's like a person who also is working. I want to talk with him more about what it was like for him. Because my parents had me when they were a little bit older, like they were both in their 40s. So he was very established in the people that he played with and the places that he'd go. But it meant that he was traveling a lot. He'd go on tour. Sometimes I'd be able to like go along with him and hang out and, see incredible places.
Was it weird being like two white dudes from upstate New York surrounded by often, musicians of color? Like you're playing Indian music. So you're not, is he like the only white dude in these bands, or is it like white bands playing Indian music? What's the makeup of that?
I'd say it was a mix of both. The 60s, Ram Dass was, a Westerner who went to India and had this incredible religious experience and brought that teaching back to America. So there were a bunch of Westerners that felt that calling to do Indian music. I always appreciated, and especially now as I look back, I'm like, okay, if you're going in and learning the music, like the secret language of another culture, how are you uplifting those artists along with yourself? And I always saw him do that. He was inviting people from India back to our house. He'd set up gigs for them. It was a pretty good mix of who he plays with. I mean, because he's not, of course, not only playing Indian music, he's also going around and he's got different jazz trios. He calls himself like the hired gun of the bhakti world. If someone needs a flute player, they give him a call. But,
so American to include a gun in his own title. So that's appropriate.
That's yes.
So you're living in this farmhouse, which is gorgeous. This property in the Hudson Valley, outside Poughkeepsie, outside Woodstock, this like famous area of upstate New York, we'll call it. And dad's flying all over the world, playing bamboo flute in India, but also all over the place.
Yeah.
And you got Paul Simon calling your house.
He did call my house once. I had no idea who he was. Absolutely. And he said, it's Paul Simon to talk to Steve Gorn. And I was like, yeah, okay. Dad, Paul Simon's on the phone. Like just no registering whatsoever.
This is what I mean when I say like, that is I bring that up because I feel like that's a perfect example of how when you would talk about the way you grew up, you're like, oh yeah, and I go to this Waldorf school and I'm doing like live action role playing, and dad's like flying to India to play flute, and I'm like, it's so it's so taken, and I don't want to say taken for granted because I don't want to limit your perception of it, but there was that was the world you grew up in. And so for a lot of us at like School of the Arts, for example, many of us grew up going to like regular suburban public school, which across the country, whether you're in Minnesota or Texas or California or North Carolina, there are differences, but there's a lot more in common with us than when we hear your story about growing up, which is truly unique to you. So that's Dad. You've got that going on. Let's talk about Barbara Bash, another one of my favorite people I've ever met.
Barbara Bash is another brilliant artist. Barbara Bash. Well, my parents met at a Buddhist retreat, Tibetan Buddhism, in the 80s. And
were you raised in that mindset of like Tibetan Buddhism?
I was, yeah. They also were some of the founders of a little Shambhala center in the town that I grew up in, Sky Lake Lodge. That's in Rosendale, or it's on the border between like Rosendale and High Falls. Beautiful spot. They there's still some great work going on there, but my mom's artistic life is really, it's a much more visually focused. She's an illustrator and a writer, but she her main work is doing calligraphy. Studying the evolution of the written word. She's got this talk that talks about the way our alphabet, the transformations that our alphabet went through to arrive at what we have today. And she loves letters. And
your mom's working with like small paintbrushes on a little canvas.
Yeah, you can picture it exactly. I mean, she starts out, she's just got the little, she's doing a lot of just straight lines with the brushstroke, because it's all about bringing this calligraphy is an act of this present moment. It's you in this space with the ink, your brush, and the paper. And the calligraphy that she leaned into was much more expressive. It was about making this connection once that once those horsehairs hit the paper. Horsehairs, yeah, horsehairs on the brush. And a variation of hairs. But.
So these are big brushes in this.
Well, I'm getting to it. So okay. She's taking this class with one of her teachers, and her teacher says that it is possible to make a brushstroke that tells your entire life story. And my mom's first thought was, wow, that's got to be one big brush.
Right.
So she developed this style of, developed this style of meditation, calligraphy, and just overall mindfulness that involves taking about like a 4-foot brush made of bamboo and horsehair, like a whole horse mane, dipping it into a bucket of ink and making these huge brush strokes across a long sheet of paper. That it ends up like looking a bit like a dance piece because her body is moving with the brush. And she leads workshops in brushwork and brush making and calligraphy. And yeah, that's been her work. And with both of them and with any artist that, artists change and they grow and they find new things in themselves and their work, and their process continues to change. So it's been really cool thinking of that, the evolution of their own processes that was happening when I was just growing up that I wasn't even aware of. And I'm like,
right. To you, that was a normal thing.
Yeah. What can you stop talking about the brushes and the music? I want to go hit people with a foam sword. Like, right. Please. But yeah, man, I was so lucky. And talk about privilege, or like just realizing the privilege that we are all enter this world with, that everyone has their own version of that. When I think about I am so grateful for that. And yeah, I've been reflecting on that a lot, and what that childhood meant to me. And I think it allowed me to view the world with a lot of curiosity and like ultimately goodwill and love. Because I was raised in an environment that said, yeah, this is what the world can be.
Right.
And I still think it can be. I just know that's not an experience for so many other people.
And that's why I wanted to get to the next thing that, I paint this where I would just say, I try to lead you to paint this picture for the audience of how you grew up, because then you get to School of the Arts in North Carolina. There's obviously so many different, you were going to go to some kind of artistic school of some kind. That was the path you were on, but you end up in North Carolina and you have so many classmates like me that went to regular public school, begged for every little drop of artistic opportunity. We were desperate to find a community theater or a class that helped us to learn artwork, or a dance course, or a choir or something. And maybe even in choir, you're just singing a bunch of Christian hymns or something. Like there's no exploration of like, what if we totally broke this form? And you had that not only at home, then also at school, then also in the summertime and in your vacations with other people. What was it like for you to get to North Carolina, to start going to school with all these other people that had all these other, let's call it, for lack of a better term, mundane, experiences growing up that to us, we hear about? It sounds like you've been going to art school since you were fucking born. And we feel like not until we were 18 did we find a full community of people that are like embracing this idea of like art is life. And you had already been on that track for so long.
Yeah. But I also recognize, and I remember that first year, and I remember there was a distance that I felt like, you can have this experience and be in this art school or this art mindset, but that's not all there is. And I think that especially when I was like meeting people, I feel like I kind of led with my experience and the things that I was bringing to it.
Makes sense.
And it does make sense. But as a result, I think I kind of, I closed off, or I withheld some part of myself. That who I was describing this life and experience and opinions, but there was some like truer version of me, which I think is actually what we're trying to get at when we think about actor conservatory, that all that stuff is great, but it's not, it just kind of, it was like fog living around what was going on. And I remember this came up in my, in a voice class, first year, when we were doing the trialogues, which were
with Jordy McMinn.
With Jordy McMinn, a pretty intense exploration of self through like imaginative practice and like physical embodiment. And at the end of each person would present their trialogue, and it usually was a pretty intense emotional thing. And I remember, I saw it and I got it, but it didn't drop in for me. Like that wasn't the moment that really cracked open. And the feedback that I got from some of my classmates was like, yeah, man, like it's cool to get to know you, but I don't know. I just feel like we don't know the real you. I mean, you know, all this stuff about Shakespeare or art stuff, but like, we want to know who you are. And I do think that, and honestly, this is one of the things that led me away from acting, is I had a difficulty finding myself in the moment because I had the memory and I knew all the lines. I was constantly taking myself out in the same way that I don't know. I think that memory of childhood and all the things that I'm bringing to this experience, it's great, but it's all meant to lead up to something new and yet undiscovered. And I know that I've used my memory and my knowledge and my experience from the past to be a bit of a cloak or a shield against more uncomfortable experiences. Because I do think just being with myself or knowing how to really listen to someone in that moment, that was an uncomfortable experience for me.
Right.
That like the myth that I had given myself of my youth dictated this specific track that I thought I was on. That was like, yeah, win an Oscar for playing Hamlet. Like, I didn't actually know how to dream. I didn't know how to dream about things that I wanted. I was so focused in the things that I thought I wanted, but I had no real sense of like self or my own style or like the things that really lit me up. And when I think about coming to school, that experience was all about finding like, what's the thing that lights you up? What's the part of the training that drops in for you? And that's different for every single person. And I mean, sometimes it happens in multiple classes that you really love, or like, that's the class that just fires me up, that gets me excited, that makes me want to learn, but also, I don't know, that makes you feel both simultaneously very big and very small. Like, I'm big, I encompass all of these truths, and this is beautiful, but also, oh my God, I'm so small in the face of like this universe and all this chaos.
You know, it's so reassuring to me in a way. And I hope that, we'll see how the audience for this show grows over time, because I would really like to keep doing it more consistently. And I wonder who will end up listening to this, right? Is it always just going to be what it has been, which is mostly friends and family and colleagues? Does it expand to people who are interested in art in general? And the one group of people that I always kind of saw this show existing for in a way is prospective students of School of the Arts or other art schools. Be like, how do people come out of a place like this? Because this answers the shit out of that question more than it does anything else in a broad way. And I think the thing that I love about the story that we've told so far is when I met you, I felt intimidated because I was like, this guy's already programmed in a way to receive this training so much easier than I am, because I was raised by like mechanics and farmers and people who work with their hands and don't know how to talk about their feelings and, aren't, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do shit. You don't go exploring new ways to do shit. And that's part of what had always made me who I was. And I think a lot of people had my experience. And when we met you, we're like, God damn, it's like this guy's it's like we're all first years, but this guy's kind of like a 20th year. And yet you tell this story and it's like you had just as much work to do as everybody else. All of that experience with like, listening to dad play the Indian flute with other people who are, playing songs about, Hindi gods and mom doing calligraphy with giant hairbrushes. And it's like we look at that and we're like, man, we're behind. And you're like, no, I'm behind.
Yeah, because I was just like, again, this is taking stuff for granted. I didn't want to listen to his fucking music. I hated being dragged along to those concerts.
Right.
I would go, I was so bored.
Right.
It wasn't till much later that I started actually seeing what he was doing and being like, holy shit, that's the same thing.
Right.
It's the same. But again, this is the problem. Too much knowledge is a bad fucking thing, especially coming into a place like that. You can't know too much. Knowledge is very nice. It's very reassuring. It makes us feel very, very safe.
Right.
But it's fucking nothing. Like it's not nothing, but it's not that important.
It's not enough.
No, it's not enough. You have the knowledge to know that you have no fucking knowledge. Like that's kind of where I'm at. Especially, I mean, just like, yeah, what the, I don't know. I just think I maybe I did come into the whole thing thinking that I had all these answers already. Right. But the process is realizing, oh shit, I'm learning how to ask the questions.
Yeah. And I think that that's the same feeling that we would get when we would be in, there's all sorts of different people at acting school. And it's so funny because this show is so rarely about school itself, but I find your journey to it and through it fascinating. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it. And I find like, I'm not going to name names because I don't want anyone to feel bad, but I hope by the end of this, even if they think I'm talking about them, they know that it's not anything but a tremendous leveling compliment to their talent. But sometimes, I know I'm a smart person, whatever that means, whether that's an amount of knowledge or an ability to figure things out. And I found that tremendously helpful at school. It was very much an asset. But what shocked me was how much the smart people, I'm putting that in quotes for anyone listening to this, the smart people would go do a scene with someone who seemed to, and I'm not going to use the word dumb because they're not dumb, but they had a simpler way of thinking about things and a less complicated, there are less pieces of their puzzle. It's like five pieces and they click right together. And you would do a scene with them and you're over here thinking, I'm thinking about all the motives. I'm thinking about all the actions and I'm the doing and I'm doing all the doing. And I'm thinking about, how this play really was adapted by the Shakespeare and the blah, blah, blah. And then it's like this other person is just quiet. They're just there and they're just doing it in the most simple ways. And they are destroying you, though you shouldn't compare acting, but you're clear. If you were watching it, you're like, that person always has the thought and an opinion and knows a lot of stuff. And that person doesn't always. And that person who's the second person is way better in this scene, way more watchable. They're getting to the meat of the play way quicker.
Well, yeah, because I just to jump in, I absolutely agree. And I think it's because we're not after the knowledge, like the knowledge, it's about the experience and the moment. And this is stuff that should not be put into words. I think it's
which easy. You as a word person have got to be like, damn it.
What a horrible predicament. Language sucks. And it sucked for Shakespeare. All of his words, none of his characters actually say what they mean to say. That's why they talk so much.
Right.
That's why they talk so much, is because they didn't get it right the first time. Hamlet talks so much because he doesn't know what the fuck he's feeling or what he's doing.
Exactly. He can't figure it out.
Communication is inadequate. So like words will always fail us. And I think knowledge makes us feel good to analyze something, to understand it, to ascribe meaning to it. But it can be dangerous to ascribe too much meaning to something because then you explain the mystery away. In a sense. And I do think that like having that was totally me though. Like, I know all the plays. I know every line in this scene. I could do it by myself. Okay, great. Can you actually listen though? Can you really, they would say, put it on your partner. I'd be like, yeah, I got it. But I know it. Like, I know the lines. Like, no. You got to put it on your partner. I'm like, no. Totally. I got it. My partner's right there, but I'm here and I know all the lines. Like it was I couldn't get out of my own way. And in that, it was, that's when like you yourself are in your own way. And it's tough because I love knowing a bunch of shit. I love being able to memorize things and having all this stuff just in my mind. And it sucks that that's like the number one thing that's going to take you out of the moment and actually not allow you to serve up the story.
Have you a tragic flaw, my friend?
I do indeed. I
want to talk about that for a second, because one of the things I also love about you, and I'd love for you to speak to this a little bit, is, if I'm not mistaken, a large part of your skill set and what became an innate ability in your personality to memorize and to retain, I think, is because you're dyslexic. And so for the longest time, you couldn't rely on the page to be there for you. You had to get it from the page and then keep it inside.
Yeah. And I think
so you're like, I keep it all in here, filed away within my own pages, because if I go back to try to read it, it's not going to happen fast enough.
And that all stems, because I'm dyslexic, listening to a lot of stories, a lot of books on tape growing up, and wanting to be able to play pretend and recreate these moments that I had heard. Yeah. And I do think it's totally like, it's because it's about the hearing it. Yeah. I mean, I can sit in rehearsal and I don't learn lines from looking at there are so many bits of King John that I just know by heart just from watching it and listening to it. So yeah, I think that's totally tied to,
do you think that has a connection to ego as well, where you're like, I was dealt this hand in a way where my brain didn't process the reading word the way everyone else's did. And you know what I did is I actually turned that into my superpower, because now I'm like, even, you see what I'm getting at?
I see
like,
what you're
like,
getting
I
at.
didn't, because dyslexia, it takes so many people so long to even diagnose. And then a lot of times they just go, I'm not a words guy. I don't read. I can't do that. It's just not my thing. And you instead, like, despite the fact that you were dealt this hand of this, and I've been with you in a room where you're trying to cold read stuff off a page, and it's tough for you. Even in your 20s, it was very challenging.
It is. And I've definitely, I do think that it didn't always feel like a big ego boost, because I was aware of all the things that I was missing. Because I was so aware that I couldn't sit down and just like knock out a book. And the cold reading was obviously like this constant fear that I have. Now I quite enjoy it, or I try to let myself enjoy it more, because with the cold reading, you don't know the lines. So it's a little easier to maybe get more to that, whatever this realness is in this moment. So you're not ahead of it. And even with cold readings, I'm always like, well, what am I saying next? Like, can I just read it through once, just to like, at least see what the structure of the thought is, to see where a thought begins so I can track it. Yeah. I don't know, man. But I do think I was I was extremely aware of the shadow side of that yes, I can do this, and this is an ability that I have, but I can't sit down and just like knock out that new Harry Potter book. I had a friend who, I swear, she would buy the Harry Potter books the day they came out at midnight or whatever, and the next day she'd be done with it. And it would take me months. It would take me months and months to read through those fucking things.
And what was the guy who read all them?
Jim
like the
Dale.
audiobooks? Jim Dale. God damn, one of my favorite.
An incredible. He's kind of Harry. Harry knew that it when you take down a mountain troll, and then Hermione's up like this. Oh, Harry, and then Hagrid's he's up here, but my favorite is Voldemort, who sounds like he's slightly constipated.
Did you ever? And have you ever, I should say, not do you ever, have you ever considered putting that skill set to work in that way, to where you are recording like audiobooks, or you're recording like things like that? Because just now in that moment, first of all, if anyone who's listening who hasn't listened to Jim Dale read the Harry Potter audiobooks, that was fucking perfect. That's exactly what every one of those characters sounds like.
My gosh.
And not just to be able to recreate it, but to have that quickness that you can jump between things. Is that something that interests you as an artist?
It 100% is. And I think I've got this beautiful microphone that you sent me for the recording of the podcasts. And I definitely want to get one of my own, because I have been thinking about that. This is jumping
You'd be great
ahead.
at it, man.
My parents always read books to me to go to sleep. Both my mom and dad did that growing up. And my current partner, when in the days of the initial courtship, they sometimes have a difficulty falling asleep. So offhand one night, they asked if I would read to them. And that's become a thing that I've been doing for about 3 years now. We've been together. When, I'm able, either over FaceTime or in person, I read them to sleep, which is I'm so thankful for that. And that it happened, like, that was never something that I knew I wanted to do until someone asked me to do it. And
I'm kind of really upset right now, but that I never asked you to do that when we lived together, because I had trouble sleeping, and you're right next door. I should have been like, I'm having trouble getting there. Can I get a few passages? I don't even need to know what you're saying. Like, just sit in the bathroom where we had the full Hamlet on the wall.
We did.
And just from the other room, just give me act 2 until I'm done.
Yeah.
That would, and now I'm regretting it.
Okay.
But it's not, we're not past that. We can
not
still do
too late. We can, I will absolutely read you to sleep, but
get your own microphone and we'll make it happen.
I will do that. But no, I'm really interested in doing, audiobook stuff. That's a grind, man, though. Like just like
it is. It's long work.
It's really long work, but that's something that I'm about to head back to New York, and I feel like I've got a bunch of threads that I'm going to start gently tugging and massaging at, and I'm going to see where they lead me or what they unravel. And that's definitely one of them, because it's fun. And it is like reading those books is when I do enjoy acting and storytelling again. I also discovered that I loved acting years after graduating school when I was a reader for an audition. I was the reader for the auditions at ACT Theater in Seattle, Washington. And I mean, talk about put it on your partner. Those scenes were 100% not about me. Like literally as the reader, I wasn't on the hook for anything. It was just seeing them. And that was the first time that I would actually like let myself have fun doing it. And you'd read the same scene over and over again. But if it was just, oh, what's this person bringing to me? Oh, shoot it back. And it was always like, I was doing that. I was like, oh my God, that's what they were talking about. Like when people got so excited and like that enjoyment, those endorphins rushing in, playing a scene with someone, like that was it. So, but I think that's also true for school that, I don't know. I now that I look back, I'm like, oh, I was so young. I didn't know anything. I thought I knew everything, but I was so young. But with a school like that, and I think with any good training program, you got to trust that shit goes into your bones and it goes into your belly and it like stays with you. And then 5 years, 10 years on, suddenly it bubbles back up at the surface and you remember this moment from class and it just clicks into place in a new way. Like those lessons, you say it's like, oh, it's wasted on the young. I didn't understand it then. I'm like, yeah, but I understand it now. Or my understanding of it now is continuing to develop. It's not, the training isn't something that happens and then it just goes away. Like if you're there for it, it stays in you and it's going to influence every choice, every decision, fucking every relationship that you have is influenced by that.
Massively. And I hear Mary Irwin's words all the time, which are really, in this particular case, Kristen Linklater's words, but if you let it, the work works.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think about it all the time, which is, and that came, I think she said it many times, but the response that she gave to a question in class is this particular context is what I always think of. And this is leading me to something bigger that I wanted to talk to you about. But people would ask in class, all right, we're in voice class, right? And for those listening, a lot of people, they hear voice class, they think that means singing. In our program, it did not. That we also had singing, but voice class was about the spoken word and about utilizing your full head to toe instrument of creating a voice. And it's so in depth. It's 3 years of the program. You're in these intense voice classes where you're, and why not as an actor, and an artist in general, should you not have as full of a voice as you can? Mm-hmm. And this means so many things from learning anatomy to exercises and stretches and speaking text and all of this stuff. And I remember one time, and this has to come up in every fucking class that's ever had voice class, which is like, okay, Mary at the time is our teacher. I'm supposed to have a long spine. I'm supposed to speak from all these resonators. I'm supposed to, and then you're like, put it on your partner. Like, how am I supposed to fucking do all of this at the same time? It's like trying to run an entire factory by yourself. I'm pulling all the levers. I'm pushing all the buttons. And how am I supposed to consciously manage to remember to do all of this shit? And her response was so simple in that, and of course we broke it open, this idea, but it was, if you let it, the work works. We're doing all of that. All of those levers and buttons are happening today in this class. Yeah. So that when you get to the stage and your job is to get your keys back from the other person in the scene that did XYZ to you in the last scene, that's what you're focused on. That's the thing you're doing in the moment, because just like as humans not in plays, we don't think about, all right, I'm using my tongue on the tip of my teeth to make this sound. You just talk. You just talk because you know how to talk. And it just happens. And it's the same thing once you learn all of it. I mean, I would love to and I don't have any examples of this, I don't think. Go back and listen to myself on stage when I was like 17 in high school and hear what my voice sounds like. And even though I haven't really acted at all since school, like 4 or 5 times maybe if I performed other than doing stand-up, like I still use my chest resonator and my head and my teeth. It just happens. It just fucking happens because I did it every goddamn day for 3 years to the point where it's in me. And the thing that I want to talk to you about, and we can kind of, this will be the tail end of this. I think often about the difference. And again, we so rarely talk about actually being at school on this show. It's so usually about before and after, but we shared so much of our school experience day to day, not only being in class together, but then coming home and living together and talking through everything that happened and talking through everything we want to do tomorrow. And the tract in drama of acting, we graduated in a class of about 30 people, and all but 4 of them were acting majors. And we had all the acting classes, but we also, as directing majors, had all these other classes, design. When it came time for the plays, we were assistant directing. And so we were learning from this other side, but yet we're still in acting class. We're still in stage combat. We're still taking a little bit of singing and all this stuff. And one of the things that I've noticed amongst the directing graduates and the acting graduates, and this is not across the board, obviously, there are plenty of exceptions to this. However, there seems to be something where we get off the hook when we don't graduate and like jump into being directors in theater, because we also accept and we're very aware that when we graduate, no one fucking wants to hire a 22-year-old to direct a fucking thing. You're not ready, kid. You got so much to do. And yet you can get hired as a 16-year-old actor and people are like, he's brilliant. It's such a gap. And when you switch over to directing, you're resigning to say, I'm on a much longer road to being given the job I'm here to get. And so what happens is we graduate and we find other things. We find dramaturgy, we find assistant directing, we find casting, we find all these other, not just career options, but actual jobs that pay us money. Meanwhile, the actors are holding themselves to this tremendous weight of, I need to get a job as an actor now. This is what I studied. This is my thing. And I look back and I'm like, would there be value in, and I don't mean at School of the Arts because they're always going to do their own thing and I respect them to do that, but would there be value in a program that takes all 30 people and trains them as drama artists rather than you're an actor and you're a director? So that way we're all learning this diverse set of skills that doesn't hold us to this title that where we graduate, we must go direct on Broadway. We must go get an acting job on Broadway or in a film or in a TV show. We're instead saying let's build this skill set around drama as a thing.
Yeah.
As a practice, as an art form. Because dude, I haven't, other than teaching for a little while after I graduated, we were coming up on 10 years out of school. Wow. Other than, think about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And now, so in that last almost 10 years, I've barely done theater. It's been so little of what I've done. And yet I have not left the world of creating art, creating content, creating stand-up and TV shows and all this. And I've never held myself to I'm a failure because I don't direct plays.
Yeah.
And yet I know so many of my actor friends who are like, maybe I should quit. Maybe I should quit this whole thing and go do something non-artistic or whatever. They're in a wash of possible failure because they're not doing that word actor. And because they haven't gotten that thing. So is there a way to give what we got in a way out of being directors where we not only got maybe one of the best goddamn directing educations that exists on the planet, and I give that to Gerald and Robert and everybody who was a part of that, but to give them that freedom that says when you're done with this training, go unto art, go unto drama and just do and don't hold yourself to that.
I think from what I understand about the school now, it's moving more in that direction. There's a lot more focus on devised work and creating things.
That's good.
And I think and like more opportunities for actors to also direct and to write and to create, to learn how to produce. These are the things we need to be teaching people. I do think so much of exactly what you're saying. A lot of this is about redefining what our measure of success is like for us. Right. And I think I feel like the actors always, it was a bit of like a smoke and mirrors thing, because you always wanted to go to the showcase. Like that was the big draw. That like, oh my God, you're going to do this program. And then you get a showcase where they literally put you in a room with people in the industry, and you could get an agent. Like you could get discovered, and they build up this myth of the showcase. And oh God, it makes me mad thinking about it. Cause I remember every one of those senior classes stands up on stage they've got contrasting scenes and maybe one or two songs.
Their little predetermined outfits that
their little color coordinated t-shirts, and they start crying when they introduce themselves and they go down the line. And that's like their farewell to the school are these two scenes that they spent way too much time thinking about.
That are short as fuck.
They go to New York or LA or Chicago, and they have this showcase, and it's the first time that a large room of people will look at them and say, okay, no, thank you. No, thank you. But no. And that's such an important thing. Like you have to audition, you have to put yourself out there. It was too bad that the showcase was built up as this mythical thing, because you put all your hopes on it, and then you're defined, or you let yourself be defined by the success that you feel
fucking
you
lottery
had.
Ticket.
It's really
like
frustrating.
You really all buy one ticket, and then you're there. And then when your numbers don't come up, because they don't. If you've ever played the lottery, you don't win. Almost. Never. This
is definitely like, this is why I'm like, oh man, like producing multi-hyphenate thing. And that's something, luckily, the actors can still, any actor that graduates school can learn that. And I've seen actors learn that when you realize no one's going to give me the thing that I want, I got to make it. And then producers are born. That's how this company that I'm working with right now at OSF was started. It was these two women who were, I think this was when they were in their 40s or something. And they realized that we are like classically trained Shakespearean actors, and there's no roles for women. We're constantly going up against ourselves, the same people in these audition rooms, full stage of guys. And, they're all trying to be Beatrice. We all got to fight it out for these, for one role that's good and another one that is 2 lines. So they thought, what if we just produced a show on our own? So that's Betsy Schwartz and Kate Wisniewski. They go to Rosa Josie, who at the time is a director who they both know in Seattle. And they decided that they were going to put up this show, this all-female production of King John. And they chose King John because it was specifically unknown. And no one would have a lot of preconceived notions about it. It felt like a new play, because I do think that any classic that you're working on needs to feel like it's a new play. You need to question it. You need to investigate it the same way you would a new play. And then to flip it, if you're working on a new play, treat it like it's a classic. Like believe that playwright knew exactly what they were fucking doing, and that every word or every line actually like has the potential to change the world. As opposed to one of our acting teachers who was like, the playwright didn't know what they were doing. They disregard the punctuation, throw it all away. But all that to say is that like actors, we all need to learn to take agency in our own careers. And that's always going to be different. So Rosa, Kate, and Betsy in 2006 formed the Upstart Crow Collective, which, they've continued to produce stuff. And now they're at fucking OSF doing King John again. Fucking King John. But I think so maybe the actors coming out of Showcase, they don't have that like There's not that like instant gratification of, oh, I'm going to get hired. I also think that we exited school. The school that Gerald built was made for a theater that did not really exist when we were leaving school. It was the theater of the 80s and 90s. It was the long summer stock where you get hired to do 10, you get a 10-month contract and you're in 3 plays and you're understudying 2 and you got all your health weeks. That is not what theater is like now. And
I did that at Georgia Shakespeare during one of my summers, and it's out of business.
Exactly. So now I think we're learning, and I think from what I understand, the faculty at School of the Arts have really pivoted to make it more about like, what are you going to create?
Right.
We want artists in the rooms. That's what you're auditioning. That's what the audition is about. It's not just how do you play this part, but like, who are you? What do you bring to this, not just this role, but this creative process? What are you going to be like to work with? So, I mean, if I was thinking about like the conservatory for now, I think it totally has to do with this mixture of working on the classics, but also learning about new work, learning about how work is produced, learning about how work is developed. Because, I mean, if an actor wants a job, a great way to get it is attach yourself to a new play, to a playwright whose work you believe in, and be with that playwright and workshop that shit over the course of many, many years. Be in the room, show your commitment to it, and hopefully if the play garners enough attention, you get to go along with it because it's work that lights you up. It's collaborators that you want to work with. Developing new work, working on classics. I mean, like on some level, it doesn't change, but I do think it's like, it's important to learn this stuff, or to like, that's what the theater world is like. It's much more about your own initiative. It's about anyone can make a movie now. Anyone can make a movie on the brilliant camera that's on their iPhone. So you have to be responsible for your own education in some way. And I think that's also an important lesson to learn. I also think that they should have taught us how to file taxes if you're getting income in multiple different states, because that shit is confusing. And there was no class about how to file taxes or like, how to make a budget, how to make a monthly budget and stick to it. Like, I
think that would have been a really cool thing to do at Intensive Arts. As much as I love ballroom dancing and I really enjoyed it. And ironically, it became a huge part of my professional career for a while, working on the shows I have. But I think that would be a great time, because I think it would be really, imagine if for the Mahabharata, when we did that, right? Imagine if you had to submit a budget and it had to be under a certain amount, and you had to itemize it and say, this is where this money is going to come from. This is what it's going to be spent on. And then if you go over it, that's you're held accountable to that. As somebody. Yeah, exactly. Just like with the time runs out.
Man, that would have been wild. That would have been wild. I don't know.
So many more lights off would have happened. I'll tell you that.
You talking about adding like money that you're getting from the school into Intensive Arts, just that thought terrifies me. Especially if you're making these 21-year-olds
beholden to give you the money. I'm saying if you don't, maybe you get $20 from the school, but if you want to do a show that costs $500, be like, well, $480 of it is coming from my parents, and that's okay, but you need to write that shit down. And then you need to make a plan for how it goes. And we need to make an agreement that if you set that budget for yourself and maybe it's capped at whatever, if you run out, you fucking run out. And you spend all the money on one costume, and all these people are in fucking show blacks because that's what you got left, my man.
Yeah. Oh man.
There's something to do there.
Budgeting. Fucking budgeting.
Wiley, thank you so much for talking to me and finally doing this show. I've been wanting to do this, have you on an episode for the whole time since 2014. And, as all of my favorite people, I hope you'll be back.
Rob, it was so great to see you and hang out and just talk about this stuff. It reminds me of old days, the hot air, fire and fire and air make
I was
hot
just
air.
talking to my wife about this a couple of days ago about how you mapped out what each element in our program. We're talking, of course, about how our like astrological signs and elements in our directing program. There were 4 of us, and we each had, we had earth and fire and air and water. There's one of each. And then you kind of, I think Steven figured that out. And then you kind of shaped that into.
I think it might have been Shelby that really figured it out. Because there was also, beyond the directing group, there was that core group of the 2 of us, Stephen and Shelby, hanging out second year. And I remember all the combos of what do fire and water make? What does earth and air make?
You got steam, you've got breath.
You got steam, you got mud, you got rain. And we were hot air, which means just fucking talking.
That's right. And this has been great, dude. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I love you, brother. It's great to connect.
I love you too. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, sounds good.